Okay.
All right. That takes it to me, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And old Echo and the Bunnymen here. Okay. So, Matt, I gave you I gave you guys my tracks, and I do this. I feel like every single week more and more because there's different tracks I want to put in, and I change my mind and I text it, and then later I'm not there. So if I remember correctly, I think the cutter was what I put in the montage, but I could be wrong. Could you guys help me out right here?
In the montage, heads will roll.
Heads will roll. Gotcha.
And
Not the
opening-
song regular one.
Yes,
Yep.
and the opening was ripeness.
Okay, gotcha. So you'll listen to those now. Okay, Matt, why don't you run the numbers for me?
Sure. So Echo and the Bunnymen's Porcupine comes in at number 315 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums. Number 30 in 1983. Number 2006 of all time. It is Echo and the Bunnymen's fourth highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. And I think we're definitely going to cover Ocean Rain. That's their highest rated album. And I'm not sure if we're covering the other two. But
No. Just those two. Yep.
Okay. Echo and the Bunnymen ranked at number 244 in overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. And I'm pretty sure this didn't make Rolling Stone's list, but I could have screwed that up too. But I really don't think it's on there. So
No, it's on the 1001 Albums Before You Die.
Okay,
though,
there you
for
go.
sure. So, Echo and the Bunnymen, first time listen. Well, you said we were away from post-punk. Guess what, guys? We're back in post-punk and some other genres that we're getting into. So, Echo and the Bunnymen, they are English, which I'm sure you figured out pretty quickly.
What?
They were, they were formed in Liverpool in the year of our Lord 1978. The original lineup was vocalist Ian McCulloch, guitarist Will Sargent, and bassist Les Pattinson. In 1980, they add Pete DeFreitas, who had Trinidadian roots along with some other places, as the band's drummer. The version of the band that we're going to cover is those. Echo and the Bunnymen soldiered on way after this without McCulloch, who left in 1987, and then actually, unfortunately, DeFreitas was killed in a motorcycle accident in 1989. So there's like a second Echo and the Bunnymen where it's a different group, and then there's actually another group later called Electra Fiction, which is Electra with a C and Fiction spelled Fixion, and that is McCulloch and Sargent, and they got Pattinson back into the fold and became Echo and the Bunnymen when Pattinson came back. But when they were just working together, Sargent and McCulloch, they were Electra Fiction. Is their thing. Okay, so there's some interesting overlap with some bands that we covered in the early period of Echo and the Bunnymen. So Ian McCulloch, who's kind of sort of the central character, it seems like, in the early to mid 80s and, formative stages, late 70s part of the band. He's part of a group called the Crucial Three, which sounds like something like a 50s band mixed with like a deep, like no wave 70s band, right? Like punk element of like the Dave Clark Five, but the Crucial Three. So they were described on all of the things I looked at as a bedroom band. And then I kept looking to see what a bedroom band was, and I couldn't find it. So I'm guessing that's just like they gigged in somebody's bedroom, right? Like put stuff together. But it kept getting described as a bedroom band, and I kept struggling to find out what bedroom band meant. So if anybody can help fill me in. But the other members of the band were a gentleman by the name of Pete Wiley, who was in all kinds of different bands, and then a gentleman by the name of Julian Cope, who we've talked about because he was in The Teardrop Explodes, a band we covered in an earlier episode. So actually they were together. Yep. So they're kind of bouncing around a little bit. Wiley leaves that group. McCulloch and Cope kind of do their own side project. It has an organist in it. It doesn't last very long. But the big thing that comes out of that is this side project called A Shallow Madness. It's Cope and the two other players, and then McCulloch, and McCulloch leaves, and A Shallow Madness gets renamed as The Teardrop Explodes. So that is actually the formative period of how The Teardrop Explodes is there. So McCulloch, who's in this band, was there. So McCulloch grabs Sargent and Pattinson, as I mentioned before, and they form Echo and the Bunnymen. Their original drummer is a guy by the name of Drum Machine, not a real person, an actual drum machine. And then De Freitas comes in later, coming there. I did find it funny that Wikipedia mentions it in other places. There is a description of how Echo and the Bunnymen were named. I thought it was going to be very interesting, but basically they were just spitballing some names, and Echo and the Bunnymen came up. And my favorite quote was Will Sargent goes, "I thought it was just as stupid as the rest," was his name. So it didn't give me a lot of context in terms of how they did it, but it seems like it was sort of a throw-off as opposed to something profound or a literary reference and stuff like that.
I love the name. I think it's a great band name for the record.
Where do you stand on that, Matt?
I'm okay with it. It's, yeah, sure. Which one's Echo?
I always thought the lead
don't
singer
think there
would
is
be
one.
You think McCulloch's Echo? But when he leaves, they're still Echo and the Bunnymen, though. So
that's just the echo of him. Yeah.
So this is another one of these bands that was more popular in England than they were in America. Often described in this as popular in England and Europe, a cult favorite in America, which I feel like is just about every British band we've covered for the last 7 years to some extent. You know what I mean? That's in there. This is definitely not the British invasion. They're kind of doing their own thing right now, outside of maybe a little bit of crossover for the class. But I think the Brits, it wasn't until really like New Romantic, right, and Duran Duran and stuff, along with pop singers, that were really crossing over. So
U2, right?
Yep. U2's Irish, but also they don't come till 83, I think or is it? It could be as early. Is it as early as 80? Was like War and Boy 80? Yeah, I think it was 80. You're right. So it was like 80. Yeah, but U2 didn't really become like U2 until The Unforgettable Fire, right, in 84, and like Sunday Bloody Sunday in America. Like they were big, but then they didn't become like U2 until the Joshua Tree in 87. So I think that's kind of where it is. So we kind of talked about their origins. They're releasing singles as early as March of 1979, pre-De Freitas. They released a debut album called Crocodiles that gets to 17 in the UK, but doesn't do really anything in the US. Then they do an EP, which we've talked about the value of the EP, right, which is becoming bigger in the 80s. Shine So Hard is the name of the EP, and that one also does mildly well. They create an album in 81 called Heaven Up Here, which the word most described, that album is described in, I listened to a little bit of it, as atmospheric, which I think is a good word for that. They're starting to get a little bit more popular in the UK. They have a top 10 album, and then 2 years after this, the album Porcupine comes. They do have a top 10 single in England. The Cutter is their single, and then it actually reaches number 2 on the UK charts, which I found interesting. I would not have expected it to be that commercial successful in the way. But yeah, this is sort of their breakthrough album on that. They had toured at different times, gotten into the ups. Like I said, they hadn't broken through. This album was described by most of the band members as being a difficult process in recording, hence why it took them so long. They'd been kind of churning them out every year, and in some cases less, because that EP was in between the two albums. But they kind of kept taking on like outside and side projects to kind of keep themselves from imploding a little bit. Pete De Freitas played with a band called the Wild Swans, and the initial version of this album was actually rejected by their record company, Warner Brothers, as too uncommercial. So the band actually agrees to re-record the entire album, which Sargent was not happy about that, but they did that. One addition made was they brought in a noted Indian violinist and composer His first name, I'm going to do my best, is Lakshminarayana Shankar. So I apologize. He's known professionally as L. Shankar, or Shankar, but he is brought in to do the strings on this album. So a lot of the research I did in articles written about the retrospective of this album is kind of all of them really not being super happy when they were recording this. Bassist Pattinson was not just unhappy with the recording process, but like he was already kind of over the industry a little bit. They kind of went through periods where they didn't speak to each other. And they, despite all this, they were able to kind of create the tracks themselves, even the re-recording of it, relatively easily. So I guess they were able to channel all of that into time periods where they could do the music, but outside of that really didn't want to see each other. So that was sort of the genesis of this album. Ocean Rain, which we're going to cover later, comes out a year later, and that is when they in between that they kind of previewed the song The Killing Moon, which is they're probably their biggest known hit, certainly the song that I associate with them. And they kind of tease that along the way, but that is for another time.
Yep. We're covering Ocean Rain next week, actually.
Right, that's why I thought I was gonna not go, and I'll probably add in a little bit more bio, the continuation and stuff along the way. I didn't want to overdo it. I can color it in along the way. But Josh, let's start with you. Thoughts on Echo and the Bunnymen, Porcupine?
Yeah, for a band that had such difficult time recording it, I sure had a good time listening to it. I really liked Echo and the Bunnymen, as I alluded to last week. I didn't really know this band at all. I only knew them by name, and really surprised how, surprised and not surprised how much I liked them. I thought this was a really solid album. I'm surprised when Matt said it was 4th ranked highest, that it was, I'm like, wow, the other 3 must be really good if I enjoyed this one this much. They're clearly Velvet Underground inspired. I feel like the Beatles obviously have an influence on them. Led Zeppelin probably also have an influence on them. The 2 bands that really came to mind when listening to them are U2, because I feel like they have this big, Echo and the Bunnymen have this big stadium sound to them, and these big songs, and kind of full sound with the strings, and there's a xylophone at times, and they have this big kind of energy to them that I equate with U2's music. And then the other band that really came to mind is Arcade Fire. I feel like the lead singer, Win Butler, kind of sounds like the lead singer of this, and the way the songs are structured, or kind of the sound of them, reminded me of Arcade Fire a lot. I don't know if you guys got that, but it seems like they must have listened to them. I did not really,
I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe
I didn't either. I might need to think about that, but I'm not going like, no, I didn't hear that at all.
Yeah.
That's an interesting pull.
Yeah. Something about it stuck out with me like that. So I really like how the guitar work on this album is really strong. I love there's so many cool guitar parts in the opening. They always start out with an interesting lick, and then they often have little sounds throughout the songs, guitar wise, that really add something to it. Like on an example of that would be in Higher Hell. They have a little guitar sound that adds to this brooding nature of the song. I really like the strings incorporated into this, and kind of the Indian inflected sounds that are throughout. Examples of that would be on Heads Will Roll, or Gods Will Be Gods. They have that works well on those. The title track Porcupine, I really like how it changes tempo or tone midway through the song. It kind of takes a left turn and goes in a different direction. It's like they decide to slow down or stop and do something else entirely, and it really worked for me, that transition. I will say that I think the front half of the album is stronger than the back half of the album. I feel like a little bit that the back half is almost a rehash or a reworking of the front half in some ways. There's a lot of sounds and techniques that just reminded me of songs I had heard previously. That could be me nitpicking, but I still enjoyed the album as a whole. I feel like the first 4 or 5 songs really kind of give you a full taste of who the artist is on this album. And I thought the album ended strong as well. In Bluer Skies, I really loved the beat on that one. It had this energy. I think overall what I really liked about them was just kind of the energy they brought. I didn't mention the lyrics too. I think this is a pretty dark album lyric wise based on what I picked up on in tone. A lot of love gone awry and things like that throughout, and emotions around that. But with the guitar work the way it was and the energy that they have, that was really a lot to carry me through, and I enjoyed this album as a result.
Yeah, I'm just realizing here that I listened to an extra track, Fuel, which was a bonus track, but I thought it was part of the regular album. So I'll talk about that too. But yeah, I like this a lot too. And Josh, you mentioned a lot of artists. The one that stood out to me the most was Joy Division. This is a poppier, happier Joy Division.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't describe this as a happy record, but I think that this has a little bit more kick in terms of pop sense and dance sensibility. But I found a lot of similarities with kind of the Ian Curtis vibe. And what they were doing here. Other kind of, post-punk, new wave stuff, The Cure is in here as well. But I like this quite a bit. Josh, I don't know if I can say that, one side was better than the other. I think that, the second side, Ripeness is a great track. I mean, that's like that guitar riff that they're playing there, it's kind of like got that new wave guitar sound, very upbeat, cool bass line to go along with that. And I liked all these songs kind of, very much. It's certainly a British album. This is one of those things where the guy's voice is very much, you can tell it's got like that British drawl to it. Mm-hmm. And I too liked I guess it seemed like it was almost like a sitar, but it is like more of the strings thing, like the Eastern or the Indian kind of vibe that's going on here, and the marimbas too. There's some cool marimba parts in the solos. So it's I didn't know any of these songs, and this is just another example of a post-punk record that's just, man, it's solid, and I agree. I think the Porcupine's an interesting song. It's almost like 2 songs in one. Yeah. That they kind of, it's the first part's kind of more of a like a somber kind of I don't know what to say, disturbing, but it's definitely a melancholy atmosphere, and it's slower, and then it kind of picks up a little bit, and it kind of goes in a totally different direction, and I liked the way that went. But there's a good mix of slower stuff. I would throw Fuel on there. Fuel should the first bonus track should actually be the last track on here, because I thought that was, and that's a very that is a very Joy Division sounding song as well. So I'm definitely a fan of this. I thought the same thing, Josh, that wow, this is their 4th highest rated album. There's 3 better ones than this. And I actually have had my issues with some of the rankings of best ever albums before, so that I might not agree with that if we listen. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. I definitely, maybe the 2 others that we're not covering I would listen to in my spare time. But yeah, really cool, really great sounds. I love the tone of the guitar, and really great. I'm glad we listened to it. I'm a thumbs up.
Yeah, the Joy Division comparison, I feel like Echo and the Bunnymen's more, I don't know, rock oriented, and I always get like a droning kind of industrial sound to Joy Division that is not here.
Yeah, but it's it's there in some ways, and that's why I'm saying like they're taking some of those ideas and they're picking it up and going in a more traditional direction. Yeah. But I definitely heard there's the undertones of Joy Division throughout this record, I felt anyway.
Yeah, I got to jump on that, Matt. It's definitely Joy Division meets goth. I'd say. I got
Okay.
Bauhaus
Wow,
vibes from this too,
Okay.
lyrically. And I mean, if you were to not hear this album and you were to read the lyrics, you would think it was being written by like
Yeah.
Robert Smith or Ian Curtis. I mean, the lyrics are exactly the same. And I definitely got an industrial feel. The word I wrote down on this album a lot is impenetrable, which I think is ultimately why this album's in the middle for me a little bit. I've talked in the past about the fact that albums that keep me at arm's length can be tough for me, because a big piece of what moves me in music is to some degree an emotional resonance. Now, whether it comes from the lyrics, the music and stuff, I got a little bit of the vibe that I got from New Order or Joy Division at times, although Joy Division brought me in with the melancholy, I think, more. I couldn't really identify a mood for this album like I could enjoy it. It was more of like that New Order feeling I got, where I'm like, I feel like I'm listening to this album in a cavern. I didn't know where to come in. The strings helped, and I think the songs where the strings were present were the stronger ones. Another thing you said, Josh, that I disagree with quite. I thought the back half of this album was better than the first half of the album, to be quite honest. I thought the stretch with Heads Will Roll and Ripeness, and I agree with you, Matt. I listened to Fuel too. I like that one quite a bit. I thought there were just more songs that I resonated with. There were songs like My White Devil and Clay that just couldn't really draw me in. They're definitely, this is kind of like where the sounds I think that we were talking about lead later to like that noise rock type of, or even like shoegazy type of sound when they strip some of the industrial out and sort of the wall of guitar sound comes in. You said Arcade Fire, Josh. I did not hear that. Who I heard was like Interpol, was like more the sound of like what this is.
Yeah.
I felt like that was a band corollary for those that might be more rooted to another era that I think sort of is in the same lane as what Echo and the Bunnymen do. I also think there will be tweaks even on the next album, because I'm more familiar with Ocean Rain than I was with this one. I've actually never listened to this album before, but I am familiar with Ocean Rain. So there are some twists on this sound that come later without doing a true spoiler alert. But I would say I'm in the middle on this one, because there were guitar parts I liked, and the strings were welcome, and I could definitely slide into the vibe and in that post-punk thing, but I don't know. It was it was like that idea of like there was not enough of any. It wasn't dark enough. It wasn't unusual enough. It wasn't, it was just. I just didn't have a hook into it in the way that I do with albums that grab my attention. And thus, it's kind of like the classic thumbs in the middle album for me. And that there are elements I liked, but I don't know if I'm quite as high on it as you guys are, to be honest.
Like the music or the feeling was too detached, something like that you couldn't.
I've talked about how what I consider to be the industrial sound is hard for me, and I more than any, I think you were hearing it different than I was.
Yeah,
like you were hearing it much more in an inviting way, and even the bands that you mentioned, I did not. I mean, there's a little bit of a Velvet Underground influence, like there is for all of post. I think
Basically
really
every
like
band.
post-punk is just like bands that listen to the Velvet Underground, right? I think that. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, to that degree, it is. But like, I didn't think it was completely. I think a lot of times when you do this stuff, it's like tied to White Light, White Heat, and not sort of the other Velvet Underground albums, which I think led in a different direction to some degree that is in this one. I just always go with that industrial sound. I kind of go back to goth meets technology, electronic music, and where those two come together, throw in sort of wave of like wall of sound type guitar. I think somebody described this album in my research as like the wall of sound, but with like, basically like industrial wall of sound, which I think was a good way to describe it, because it is. It feels like that guitar is like a wall that's being built, and that sort of sound becomes more and more prominent when we start to get into noise rock and shoegaze and all of these different, we keep talking about them, but they're coming, because like once we get to it, like, I mean, we're going to be like in the late 80s, right? We're going to be like in a series of these type of bands over and over and over again, like bands that are trying to get that sound, you know, whether they leave it out there like My Bloody Valentine, Jesus and Mary Chain, Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., right? And then there's going to be bands like the Pixies, right? That kind of, you know, can write pop songs, but they also have that sound. And so that's coming. And I feel like this is almost like the appetizer for that sound. And bands are bringing it in so that we can get ready for it. But I did feel that this album, there just didn't seem to be a door to walk into for me to emotionally connect. So it can only get so far when I can't walk in the door, and that's where I felt like I was at. Yeah.
See, it's interesting. I industrial is not a word that came to mind. I think I just have a different thought of like what because industrial, I automatically think of a band like Nine Inch Nails, right? Or just like it's very, and this to me was much more of a. Like there was more new wave here than industrial, I thought, and I was just seeing more correlations with a lot of the bands that we've done already. It's definitely a full sound. I would agree with that, and I could see how noise rock comes out of stuff like this. I'm not quite there with the industrial. I guess I don't know. Maybe I'm not as I'm picking up on the same things
I might not
as
be
you are.
using it right. I'm not some expert. I think I sometimes overuse industrial for like music that sounds impenetrable for me. It's definitely not as electronic as industrial as you think of it. So maybe I could draw a distinction there that my expansion of industrial sound is more cold, icy. I think I expanded out there, but I think probably in the definition of it, right, it's caused by an electronic sound, and that is not what's causing that feeling here. That's why I think maybe like noise rock goth would be like another kind of way to describe this. Certainly post-punk, but I struggle to use the word post-punk because it's like
so
everything and nothing at the same time, right? It's kind of like that idea. So
industrial for you is like almost an emotional
it's a vibe
term. Yeah
to use the word, I think. But I may not be using it. In fact, I know I'm probably not using it by the dictionary, but I'm not big on putting stuff in genres either. I think stuff transcends genres or is pieces of it, but sometimes it's almost like if you put it in the genre box too quickly, you can't see what its narrative is it becomes easy to be cliche. You know what I mean? When you start putting stuff in genre
but that's why it's
boxes,
good to kind of like, if you're describing something, throwing it sounds a little like this genre, a little like that genre. I mean, it definitely has a purpose of kind of like formulating the foundation of what you're hearing in some way.
As I often find, I go to all music after this, right? To create the things which album moods, album themes, and influenced by. So album themes, the 5 they have are autumn, winter, solitude, introspection, and reflection. And then some of the album moods are nocturnal, gloomy, detached, brooding, wistful, melancholy, eerie. So, like, I mean, and that's kind of what I was hearing. You know what I mean? And that's, I think, why it was impenetrable to me, because it felt... Whereas, like, Robert Smith kind of, like, invites me into his misery. And so I'm like, I can go there because I could be... Whereas Matt, it's hard for him because he's like, I don't want to go in door number 1. It's open, but I'm not going in that door, right? You know? So I think the detachment, you know what I mean, allows Matt to hear this type of music maybe more. Whereas for me, it's like, no, I need that door open so I can feel that shit. But if, like, the door is kind of closed, you know what I mean? I feel like I'm looking at someone else's thing, but with an invitation not to be in there, it's harder for me, if that makes... Does that help to explain it a little bit?
Yeah. It's so interesting.
Like Joy Division kind of kept it open for me. It was like I had to push the door and then I could get in, right? And there's enough there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't like pick up on that feeling listening to this. I think the wall of guitar and stuff really like carried me through, and it kept me engaged and despite kind of the lyrics. And maybe this is where like the disconnect is, where the lyrics, even though as dark as they are, that the detachment there did not I guess the sound of the guitars and the music itself did not equate with kind of that feeling that you get from The Cure or Joy Division or something.
Like not even the way he sang, because a lot of it sounded like very paranoid, you know, even if you didn't know what he was singing about.
I definitely got an Ian Curtis vibe.
You know, what can you say? You know, like a lot of that stuff where it's like, you know, you know, like that sound, like to me is like an immediate, like, you know, yearning, right? And you know, it's like, where is that coming from? So,
but there's a pop. To me, there's a poppier element here.
Sure,
there's a more of an upbeat.
Agreed.
And it's yes, I can see how it's cold and icy and whatever, but I didn't find it that much where I was like, wow, this is like heavy. It's heavy, but it's also also light.
I didn't find it heavy. I didn't find
it's autumnal.
But a heavy like in the sense that, like, you know, the dramatic theme, the dramatic presentation of the vocals, for example, is like it's kind of like this, like, you know, this big theme kind of thing, and there's there's whether that's pain or whether it's something else going on in there, but
funereal. I think that's the word that's used sometimes.
Okay, all right, sure, but I thought that there was I just like the variety here of like
funeral.
Yeah. I just thought I thought that I again, that like the chord progression, the guitar parts, the tones and stuff, I just thought it all melded well together for it's pretty enjoyable. Like I wasn't terribly
It's a good
depressed.
guitar album. It really is a good guitar album.
Yeah.
And it's I
think at the end of the day, that's probably what I'm responding to the most on this album is the guitar ultimately.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first albums, I think, where all of us and our respective personalities and entry points for albums, like, we came at it from different ways, you know? And I think that's a really interesting thing, because I think there's something to be said for every way that we took it, because there's probably a little bit of truth in each thing that we said and a little bit of deviation for each person, you know what I mean, along the way. I want to clarify one thing, though. I didn't find this album heavy. I found this album to be like impenetrable, but there's been a lot of heavy albums we've listened to that I did not find impenetrable. I just found it detached. Heavy and detached are not the same thing for me, if that makes sense. So I do want to reframe that. In that, as you said, there is definitely a pop sensibility to this album that was not present in some of the albums we listened to that had that heaviness. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can't write a song like Ripeness and be that heavy. I mean, it's just this like galloping, like,
I'm surprised that
bass line and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's like one of the fewest. That's got one of the fewest listens on Spotify.
I was shocked that wasn't the single. I'll be honest with you, because to me, Ripeness, Heads Will Roll, and Back of Love were the three songs that screamed potential single to me. The Cutter definitely did not feel like that to me. I was actually kind of shocked when I read that was the single, but hey, to each their own.
Yeah, well, sometimes they choose the singles before.
It's kind of funny. It's almost like as you look at the plays on Spotify, it's like almost as each song progresses, there's fewer listens. So it's almost like people like getting sick of the record. They just decide to stop listening. It's not,
You're
not
right,
100%.
man. I'm looking right now. Wow,
Not
it's
totally.
pretty close.
I mean,
Heads Will
Porcupine-
Roll, brings it back, but.
Right. Yeah, but
that's kind of how it is on Amazon. Actually, it's like the first two tracks and everything else is the same. So,
I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah,
I wanted to listen to the whole thing, but
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to the next one.
I know that album a little bit better. I'm looking forward to talking about that to see what you guys think comparatively. Yeah.
We don't often get albums back to back by the same artist. So
their big single is "The Killing Moon." Are you guys familiar with that?
I think so.
Song?
I am because of Rock Band.
No.
Okay, gotcha. So there you go.
Yeah, I think I know that one.
Okay, so thumbs in the middle for me sounds like a robust thumbs up for both you guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Great.
Post punk continues to win my heart.
Post punk for the win. Yeah.